Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. Today I'm excited to welcome another guest to the show, my very good friend Natasha Rose. Natasha is about to star in a production of the literary classic, Sense and Sensibility, adapted from the Jane Austen novel. And it struck me that this is closely linked to one of my previous episodes on sibling rivalry. In mine and Natasha's discussion, we explore the pivotal relationship that Elinor has with her sister Marianne, and also with herself, as it's clear that Elinor does not prioritise her relationship with herself, or even recognise the impact that her actions have on her well-being. In effect, she's using her relationship with her sister as a defence mechanism so that she doesn't need to look at what she might actually be wanting. So I invite you to sit back and have a listen to our discussion as we explore another side to the sibling dynamic. So welcome to the show, and today I'm extraordinarily excited because I'm having on the show one of my most favourite people in the world, Natasha Rose. And Natasha is not a stranger to being a podcast guest. Normally, Natasha is invited on to talk about being a woman in a man's world and also being the head of a very successful family company. But today we're not talking about that at all. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the dynamics in siblings and what happens when you don't pay attention to those. And the reason that we're doing this is because Natasha, as part of her other life, is a very, very successful actress. I was going to say amateur actress, but I don't think you're an amateur actress at all. I've seen you on stage, Natasha. You're really very good. So please, for those of the audience who don't have the benefit of knowing you as well as I do, please introduce yourself.
I'm Natasha Rose, and by day I head up a family business which is in construction, so very much the man's world that Julia talked about. And then at night I'm part of a very vibrant and exciting theatre group that have the absolute luxury of a grade 2 listed building and its grounds in which to perform really, really wonderful outside theatre for 12 weeks of the year. Obviously, we can't do any longer than 12 weeks because the British summer is what it is. But it's a very magical 12 weeks, and it's beautifully created by this incredible woman, actually, Jean Harley, who had this vision and got her hands on this grade 2 listed building and built with her own blood, sweat and tears this amphitheatre in the grounds. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be on my doorstep and to be able to be in it.
Oh, fantastic. And I have been, and it is truly beautiful. And this summer, I already have my ticket to the hottest show in town. You're doing Sense and Sensibility, so perhaps not one of the greater known Jane Austen shows, but this is a big deal when it comes to family relationships, isn't it?
Yes, and both the negative and the positive impact of those family relationships, and very much set obviously at a time when women had none of the power in the family. And in fact, it starts with a father dying and leaving everything to his son, and the sort of the three sisters being very much without home or hope. So they have to sort of pull together and get through it somehow.
And you play Elinor, don't you?
Yes, which is very much what they call acting against type, and has been somewhat of a challenge. She is very, very restrained. She believes that she's doing the correct thing by burying all of her feelings and being very polite, keeping them all under the surface. And poor thing, she has to endure quite a lot of hardship before she gets her happy ending.
So tell me what you've learnt whilst playing Elinor.
Do you know, for the first 3 months, I just didn't like her very much, and that was awful to say, but I was so frustrated because I thought, just say it, just say what you feel. If someone's hurting you, tell them. But now what I admire about Elinor and what I've really learned is that she places family and family dynamic first, and her own feelings and needs second. And whilst I wouldn't advocate for that, it is very noble of her to do that, because she genuinely worries more about the happiness of her sister and of her mother than she does of her own happiness.
What do you think are the real downsides for her in this?
Yeah, the downsides for her are that she puts her needs last all of the time, and she puts the needs of a very much more flamboyant, over the top, demonstrative sister first, and the family really lives around the needs and wants and desires of Marianne, her younger sister. Marianne sucks all of the oxygen almost out of the family, and it's a shame. In this play, I was dying for a particular line to be said, and it's Jessica Swell, who's a fabulous playwright and brilliant, and she's adapted the book beautifully, but she missed out one of the lines from the book, which Marianne finally says to Elinor at the end, when she says that she compared her behavior to what it should have been. She compares it to Elinor's, and she's sorry. And I love that line, because it's the realization finally from Marianne that actually it is right to express ourselves. It is right to say how we feel, but not if it's at the expense of all of those around you. That it means that those around you don't have that space to be able to say how they feel and what's going on for them and their worries. If you're so self-absorbed, and so she says so many lines. One of the lines Marianne says is, no man could ever make me happy. I require so much. I always want to slap her when she says it. Because, there's nothing wrong with knowing what you want and demanding high standards and having boundaries and having standards. That's great. But you are not necessarily always the most important person in the room. And there is that sometimes it's better to be quiet and let others speak, let others emote, let others have their say. And Marianne is very much the star of her own show.
I mean, I know that we've had conversations where you've struggled with playing Elinor, even though I know how much you wanted the part before you got it.
Yeah. Yes, I all the time I want to just do a swapsy with Marianne, because it's so much easier to be that person, isn't it? It's actually so much easier to be the person that takes up all the air and that's dramatic and flamboyant, and it's sort of the person that we all secretly want to be but are too polite to be. And the trouble with playing Elinor, and why I found her more uncomfortable, is in reality she's closer to who I actually am, and that makes me uncomfortable, because I want to be more like Marianne and set these rigid standards for everybody to come up to, and and say whatever comes into my mind. But actually the reality, and I suspect the reality for lots of us, particularly women, I think, in the household, our needs and wants and desires tend to be the last thing on everyone's list. And we so often, and as mums as well, sacrifice or put on hold what it is we want or need, because making other people happy becomes much more important. And that was a bit close to the bone for me to play.
Well, I did wonder about that, and I'm just wondering as well if, what do you think is going on for Elinor, as well as you said, it's easier to put other people's needs first. I mean, I've got some psychodynamic ideas, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, because you actually are, for a period of time, you are Elinor.
I think it's partly the restraints of the time, isn't it, that she's in, and she feels that she's obeying the rules that society has dictated that she obey. And I wonder whether it's partly that she feels, who is she? Why does she actually deserve happiness? Um, they've lost their fortune, they've lost their standing. She says at one point how greatly she admires Edward, and yet he may be expected to marry well, which is an awful thing to say of yourself, as if, but he'll be expected to do better than you. And yeah, I think that she doesn't see her own qualities. She feels, I suppose, in Marianne's shade. He has none of the style or eloquence or beauty, even perhaps, of her sister, and feels that therefore, is she worthy to have expectations as grand as being loved? Yeah, I think that she almost seems confined to being and content to be a spinster somehow, as if that's what was laid out for her.
Mm. Mm. Because it just makes me think of defense mechanisms and
Oh, I
the
try not to think of those ever.
well, we do need them quite a lot, and I just wonder whether hers are in overdrive, in that she's defending herself so much about even really, a tiny, tiny chink of what she might want is too frightening for her. So that's why she creates this world where her feelings not even don't matter. They just don't even come into the equation.
No, and I think I mean, I've been listening obviously to your podcast over the weeks, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't even realize their defense mechanisms, and she certainly wouldn't realize that that's what they are. But she's a big one for using the logic and the pragmatism and hiding behind that. She loves a bit of logically thinking through the situation rather than feeling through the situation. I think that would be far too painful.
Oh, a bit of rationalization, intellectualization.
Rationalization, there you go. She's the queen of rationality. Yeah.
Mind you, as you, I know this full well, I'm also can be the queen of rationalization. So I'm certainly, I'm not throwing stones in a glass house here. Rationalization, love it. So if you could sit Elinor down and have a conversation with her, what do you think you would say to her?
Gosh, so much. Firstly, I'd definitely tell her to not compare herself to either of her sisters, because they are both wonderful in their own way, but so are you. And I think she's sort of lived life in the shade of her two sisters, when she should find her own spot of sunshine. And also that your place in society doesn't determine your worth, because she seems fairly sure that it does. And that have a little more faith in yourself as well, and to be a little bit more honest when people are being really very cruel to you. She likes to think of herself as being rational, but actually it would be rational to put more boundaries in place, and she doesn't always do that, particularly with Lucy, who is sort of secretly married or secretly engaged, sorry, to Edward, and keeps rubbing it in her face. And particularly with her awful sister-in-law and her awful mother-in-law, who are just terrible to her. And she just takes it. And I don't think we should ever do that. I think a very polite, but a polite boundary can go a long way.
Oh, yes, polite.
Polite.
Polite. It makes me think of, and you and I have discussed Matthew Hussey on many an occasion. It reminds me of when he says, kind in tone, ruthless in actions.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yes, exactly. Exactly. Because bless her, she's a doormat, really. she doesn't deserve to be, because she's far too wonderful and intelligent and funny to be anybody's doormat. But she does seem to get the rotten end of the stick for most of the book slash play, you know, right until the end when it all comes right for her.
There's something as well that when you were talking there really made me think, we can think, you know, and this isn't just about Elinor, I think this is about all of us, you know, we're talking about everyday life, in that we can think actually by not being strict in our boundaries, we are allowing people to see more of us, or allowing our true selves to come out. And actually what it means is people just trample all over us.
100%. And that actually, it's not that important for people to like us. They're not people that bring anything into our lives. You know, she does finally stand up to her brother-in-law and sister-in-law and give them some home truths, and which they're disgusted and they flounce off. But it's one of my favourite bits, because inside I'm screaming, good for you. They needed telling that. They needed that boundary putting in place. And if it means that they're therefore out of your life for the rest of that afternoon, or for the rest of your life, you've lost nothing, because they bought you nothing. So I think with family, we find that difficult, don't we? Because we think that we're constantly told that family is everything and family is important and you should surround yourself with family. Well, indeed, if they are supportive and loving, but not if they're toxic and awful.
Well, quite, and it really it then, you know, because both of us are mothers, and if we don't teach our children to have effective boundaries, then we're just perpetuating this further and further and further, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I worry I might have done too good job with my son, because he never holds back in telling me what he thinks isn't appropriate.
No, I think my daughter as well is very kind of like, no, well, this is what I expect. And I think, oh dear, am I raising a mini Marianne?
She just needs so much. She requires so much.
I love that. I think maybe I might start to adopt that now. But it's tricky, because actually sometimes we do require so much, and actually it's okay to require too much, but like you say, not at the expense of other people. I think that's the key.
Do you know, maybe that's why I get so triggered by that line. When I get so angry every time she says it. And actually, that's interesting. Maybe I do require. Maybe that's why I get so triggered by that line, because at least she says it. She knows herself, doesn't she? She knows what she wants. She wants an endless supply of sonnets and a tireless passion for the pianoforte. I mean, she knows exactly what she wants.
She's loud and proud with it, isn't she?
Absolutely. If he can't read poetry out loud with enough gusto and feeling, he's not for her. She's got very, very clear demands that she makes of the opposite sex, and maybe that's not a bad thing.
Absolutely. Well, that's certainly what my teenage daughter tells me constantly at the moment. So maybe I don't need to worry so much about boundaries with her. So I've had the most fabulous time talking to you, Natasha. I mean, I do every time anyway, but today it's not just about me and you. So what I would like to do to say thank you for coming on the show is to invite you to share with everyone, you know, where can people catch you in Sense and Sensibility this summer?
Well, firstly, it's not just me. It's a really wonderful cast who are all absolutely brilliant and very funny. I think people think, oh, Jane Austen, but it's not Jane Austen. It's inspired by Jane Austen's book, but it's Jessica Swell, who is a cracking, hilarious, brilliant playwright. So it's a very, very funny play, very fast-paced, and in beautiful grounds. And all they need to do is go to tolthorpe.co.uk, and all the details of Sense and Sensibility and when it's on and how to book it, and indeed booking it on the website is available there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I am looking forward to coming to see it. I'm coming in about 3 weeks, I think. So I'm already there. Hopefully, I'll see some of the show listeners too. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I have a million ideas to ask you back for other episodes too. So I'm sure it won't be your first time. But thank you again, Natasha.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.